because, it kind of loosely connects to what we're going to be talking about. Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining, either live or if you're watching this after it's been recorded. We're going to be discussing UFOs. We're going to be discussing it, but you may have never heard before. We're not going to be just talking about spacecraft and space aliens. We're going to be talking about fairies. We're going to be talking about 1,000 years of rich history and knowledge regarding these supernatural events that have culminated in our modern times as the alien experience. But I do want to answer a question that has not really connected to what we're doing here, but still really important. Someone asked me if Satan exists. So we're going to try to move through this pretty quickly. There's a lot here, but I'm going to give you the clip notes. So the YouTube link is going to be in my link in bio link tree. So if you just click on the link in my bio, you'll see it right there. So with Satan, Lucifer, and the devil, it's kind of like in the Bible how how all of the interpreters of the text collapse Ruach, Elohim, and YHVH, the Tetragrammaton, which is not the same as Yahweh. All that's collapsed into a word God, which is dishonest and misleading and just outright incorrect. The same thing happens with the devil, Lucifer, and Satan. Okay? Satan, the actual meaning of the word Satan is adversary. It is not a specific adversary. It's not the adversary. It's the adversary in a particular situation. So someone who is a Satan is your adversary, is your enemy. And they tend to be diabolical, not so much like just putting stress on you in a way that helps you grow. They're trying to cause distress, not eustress. Eustress is that healthy stress. It's like when you work out, you get eustress on the muscles, which helps them to get stronger. So there's a little tear, there's a little pain, there's a little struggle, but it ultimately grows your muscles. That would be like a eustress. A distress is when you sprain it really badly because you're lifting too much. So an adversary tries to cause distress. And it's our job to try to overcome the adversary, whatever the adversary is. In the Quran, Shaitan is a demon conjurer. And so fundamentally, they are also a Satan or an adversary. So do I believe Satan exists? I believe there are many Satans all over the world. And I do believe that there may be some interdimensional or spiritual entity, maybe a hyperconscious, intentional entity that we might call a Satan or an adversary. Surely. But do I think there's a big bad guy hiding underneath the magma of the earth, or something ridiculous like that? Absolutely not. Because Satan literally means adversary. Lucifer, shining one, relates to a king in ancient times that they then related to Venus, because the way the Venus would fall, the morning star shining brightly would then fall. It's this idea of you can shine brightly as a leader, but if you give way to pride comes before the fall. Okay, that's what Lucifer means. Lucifer is a very modern interpretation of the word anyway, because it used to be directly related to a metaphor of Venus as a mythological story, much like Greek stories, where pride comes before the fall. You shine really brightly, but then you fall in love with your own shine. Does this sound familiar? People talk about Luciferianism, this belief in oneself as a god. But the issue with Luciferianism often is that you become in love with yourself or the idea of yourself as a god. I tell you guys all the time, ye are gods. So did Christ. But it wasn't a Luciferian approach. It was a measured, tempered, humble approach. Okay? And then the devil literally represents eustress. Eustress. The devil was a pagan concept before it was a religious Abrahamic one. And it simply meant the agitating forces of the environment, which caused you stress, but that you were meant to overcome because it was eustress. A Satan is an adversary that causes distress. And Luciferianism, or Lucifer, is surrounded by the idea of someone who can become an adversary to many if they become prideful. And that's the definition of those three words, which come together and have been collapsed in meaning and now misinterpreted to mean some big bad guy that's out to get you. It's not how it works. So that's the actual meaning of those three words and concepts. Which is a large part of the reason there's so much confusion and corruption in religion, right? I did do a video a while back, but I might come around and do it again. Apple user. Okay, so the adversary thing's going to connect a little here with the UFO stuff. Okay, so today's talk, and like I said, we can move back and forth. I know my audience doesn't need me to talk about one specific thing. Thank you very much. One specific thing, like we said, UFOs. We're going to talk about UFOs, but I know we like to bounce around and talk about cool ideas. So I'm welcome to kind of open it up and freestyle a little bit, but maybe stay on course as much as we can. Can you give ideas on how to use magic without exalting yourself above others? Absolutely. And we'll cover that closer to the end, but I will get to that one. I'd like to focus a little of the time, like I said, on the UFO. The reason I've been so hard on this one is because it's such an important thing happening now that's going to take over religion. Jacque Vallee saw this in the 60s and the 70s. He's like, oh, a new religion's forming out of this. Just the way a religion's formed out of the old versions of paranormal. When whatever these things are, masqueraded themselves as fairies or Mother Mary or whatever it was, whatever this thing is, whatever this entity is, which is behind, I think, a lot of the paranormal things happening, it presents itself in a way that is digestible by the culture and the people of the time. So what do I mean by that? Way back in the day when we were more of a people of folklore, they presented themselves as just quirky people, fairies, gnomes, and dwarves. Like, no joke, the way people have sightings of aliens and UFOs, this is like, understand what I'm saying is well recorded, documented history. The same way millions of people now have experienced those big black almond-eyed gray aliens. People had the same thing with gnomes and dwarves and fairies. Interestingly enough, they also had big eyes, but they were big human eyes. Like they had the pupils and the iris and all that. Okay. Literally face-to-face contact with dwarf people and fairy people. Then all of a sudden, those dwarf and fairy people went away. And then what replaced them? Martians, Venusians, human beings that when you ask them where they came from, they said they're from everywhere. Or, oh, we're kind of like all over the place, but we'll be in Cuba next week. That was the answer they would give. Okay. Where did the fairies go? Where did the dwarves go? Where did the gnomes go? Where did the Martians go? Where did the Venetians go? Why do we have Pleiadians and Zeta Reticulans and Draconians now? Why hasn't any one of these groups of beings that come to us explained why they replaced the last ones or why they're just getting here now? When you look at the actual details and data surrounding the alien phenomenon, the alien paranormal phenomenon, it's kind of easy to parse out that we've been getting lied to. If you just look at it with a logical mind, if all of the reports, there was never a gray alien reports 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago. There were reports though. Again, fairies, dwarves, gnomes, big-eyed people. So where did they go? We never got a story like, oh, our species is going extinct. We have to leave this planet and go. Nothing like that. All of a sudden, our culture and technology changes, and all of a sudden, we have a new visitors that are replacing the old visitors, and there's never any backstory as to why there was a transition. It's because it's a lie. That's because it's the same entity over and over again, displaying an image. Here's a perfect example. This is a real report. A husband and wife had the wife's sister visiting at their house. Okay. The fairies are still here because they weren't ever fairies, like intrinsically. You understand? Because now they're just appearing as gray aliens. And we'll get into other very fascinating similarities between the gray alien and UFO sightings and the fairy sightings, with fairy circles and crop circles. Okay? So, where was I at? Give me 1 second here. Yes. So the husband and wife had the wife's sister over. Okay. And in the middle of the night, they hear some strange, kind of like banging noises or something like that, a rumbling. The husband and wife. They get up and they go into the room where the sister is. It's the guest room. And the sister is sitting up in bed, staring at the ceiling, frozen, can't move, catatonic. They look over to where she's looking and they see a ball of blue light. Keep this in mind, this ball of blue light, because it might be reminiscent of the stories you hear out of Skinwalker Ranch and other stories of paranormal. They see a ball of blue light. When the sister finally comes out of the catatonic state, they ask her what happened, and she said that when she looked up, the roof was gone, and she was looking at a spaceship, and there was a window in the spaceship, and she could see two gray aliens in it. Now, a couple of interesting things happening here. One, they both are seeing two different things. The husband and wife, who obviously weren't the target of the image, the target of the message, let's say, I think saw a more real or fundamental version of what these things are in this blue ball of light. Okay? And what the lady was seeing was an image that was being impressed upon her by that blue ball of light. Okay? Another thing. The husband and wife are two people who had a shared experience. There's sort of this kind of like loose, unofficial rule in psychology. You know, if one person's seeing a pink elephant, they're probably hallucinating. But if two people see the pink elephant might be real, because you're having two individual perspectives see the same thing. We'll get into abductions and dreams and all that too in this. That's a great question. We'll jump to that. We'll jump to that next. Let me just make sure there's no other questions here. Okay, so what am I getting at here? That what we're seeing is the skin. We're just seeing the avatar of what they actually are in the gray alien, in the Pleiadian, in the Draconian, in the fairy, in the dwarf. I've seen the blue balls of light, by the way. Well, that's a great question about protecting yourself from these beings, because first we have to figure out if these things are nefarious. Because, look, there's been some research and studies that show that some mildly aggressive and dangerous things have happened, but we don't know if these things are the same things as the other things. Now, we're going to get into kind of my theory of how to see this as an ecosystem, because that's what we have to start doing, is seeing it as an ecosystem. What are we doing right now? What is politicians with UAP? They're basically saying that everyone's talking about this being one thing. Either it's aliens or it's government technology. What if it's a little bit of all of it? What if it's some kind of beings, intelligent beings that are not human? But what if also the government's taking advantage of that so they can put all their secret projects under the cover of aliens so that we don't realize the high technology they have? And what if also people like Carl Jung and Cynthia Nelson are correct, and that we're actually projecting our subconscious and unconscious on a reality which is more like a dream world, which we can dream things up from the subatomic level and manifest reality? And what if it's all three of those and more? Where do these things happen? Usually in rural, isolated areas. What happens when you're in a rural and isolated area? Your consciousness is not being managed by the larger superculture. So maybe you have a more open mind. Maybe you're more relaxed. Maybe you're eating better. And so the systems aren't as clogged up. Maybe you're seeing better. Maybe you're seeing larger in the spectrum. Maybe reality gets a little woo, 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 because it's not being solidified by very specific material, cultural, philosophical systems that make you think a certain way. And so they're able to manifest in those areas where they're not able to manifest in the big cities. The most you ever see in the big cities is lights in the sky. It could be anything. No one's ever seen the flying saucer land in the middle of Central Park. And I think that's a really important piece of information for us understanding the overall phenomena. Why not? If it's happened millions and millions of times, you think eventually it would happen in a city. And there'd be more opportunity for it to be seen because there's so many people there to see it, but it never happens there. That's a really, really important data point with this entire UAP thing, is we may see lights in the sky, sure, whatever. It could be anything. It could be a meteor, it could be a satellite, whatever. It could be a rocket. These days, it could be any day of the week, it could be a rocket, how many they're launching in the sky right now. But it never happens. We never see the saucer. We've seen the air. What was it? There was one time where there was those band of lights over Washington D.C. Still, no one saw a craft. No one saw an alien. And there's definitely not a hoax going on where there's over 3 million people who have had abduction experiences. Many of those corroborating the physical appearance of the being and corroborating the physical appearance of the craft. It can't be a hoax. Too many people have seen the same thing. And these people are not related and connected together. These are regular average people. There's only millions of those people could coordinate over the course of 50 years, for instance, a consistent narrative of gray aliens. So we know what's happening. We just have to ask ourselves, what does that mean that it's happening? Is it a psychic effect? Because they found physical evidence. There's been physical evidence after a sighting. So we know that some of this has a physical nature to it. So let's get into questions a little bit here. All right. Okay. Yeah, not your mom. This is a tie-dye shirt. I'm not sure why you think pink is like brown dirt or whatever, but yeah, I'm wearing a tie-dye tank top that is clean. Thank you for being here. Nat. There's always gonna be those weirdo trolls, folks. That's part of the reason I turn the comments off. You can come to the website though. And there's a nice community there where you can talk and chat, and we can report all those trolls and kick them out, ban them for life, because they're an absolute waste of time. All right, so let's jump to the YouTube questions here. Can you give any advice? We'll touch that one a little bit. Are they just exposing themselves to induce fear? I don't think they're just exposing themselves to induce fear, but I do think sometimes it appears to be the goal of causing fear. Yes, but that's not the end goal. I don't think the fact that we feel fear is their ultimate goal. Things like fear and awe and amazement, these types of emotions, when you're hit to the core, like terror, like the version of fear which is absolute terror, cosmic terror. Cosmic terror is probably the greatest, most powerful version of fear. And that's what these things invoke when they do scary things, is they invoke cosmic terror, sort of a deep, deep terror that cannot be resolved. And you realize how small and insignificant and powerless you are to the potential for a force that is more intelligent and more powerful than you. So the abduction experience, yes, that's a fear-inducing experience, but the fear isn't the end result. Unless, of course, these things are siphoning energy off us. And when you cause someone stress, they actually start to lose energy. This is where it gets really interesting, right? We won't go too into the dark stuff without a lot of context beforehand, but I do want to cover this stuff. So when you're stressed out or you're in fear, your body is basically a superconductor. When it's eating healthy, when it's in a right state of mind, right state of heart, you basically don't lose a lot of energy. It gets circulated pretty well by your bioelectric field. But when you become stressed, when you're feeling negative emotions, fear, sadness, guilt, resentment, you start to lose the energy. You become a less efficient generator of your own energy, which kind of gives credence to this idea like Loosh, like Monsters Inc. is real. So there's the possibility that that's happening. So let's touch on abduction, because this is again going to connect, lower chakras too. It's going to connect to this kind of idea too, to the old stories that had nothing to do with aliens. So there's one thing um, about abductions that happens over and over again. Okay. During the procedure, one of the things that they'll do is they'll insert a metal object into you. In many of the cases, the metal object is inserted kind of below your navel. It's painful and it's scary. So for anybody that argues that these are actual aliens that are inseminating people and all this other stuff, no disrespect, but hundreds of years ago, it was demons with sewing needles that would do the same thing. These are real stories. These are real credible stories. So hundreds of years ago, it was demons with kind of like giant sewing needles poking the stomach. Were they inseminating women with demon DNA? No. They knew that demon was just trying to cause them terror and fear. Why is it that we have the same action happening with a different skin? Because we're not being given the real image. The demon with the horns and the spiked tail and the teeth, what does that represent? Our basic primal fear of predators. It hits our subconscious and pulls those things that we fear the most and then projects the scariest image. Why don't we see those things as much anymore? Because we have become the greatest apex predator on the planet. So those aren't our fears anymore. We don't have to worry about that. If we don't want to fight a bear, we just don't go to that part of the woods. And there's an app for that. Where are the grizzly bears? So we've really mitigated those fears. So we don't see those types of things as much. We still do, because there's still those primal fears with us. But it's not at the tip or the zeitgeist of the culture. What's at the tip of the zeitgeist of the culture is an intellectual threat. An intellectual threat. What's one of the common descriptions of these aliens? Big heads. What do big heads represent? Kind of on a simple level, big brains. More intelligent, more technologically advanced. That's what scares us now, because we become technologically advanced to the point that we render predators obsolete. We put them in cages and zoos, right? They're not a problem anymore. But we still have these sort of existential cosmic fears and terrors, and they manifest themselves as these things. The question becomes, when we get into this idea of how do we protect ourselves against them, the question becomes, is this something that's being projected from our own collective unconscious and subconscious fears? Or is this an entity that is intelligent that can invoke those fears and project them outward so that we have an experience with it and think it's real? Or is it even greater than that? It's not just sort of unconscious, subconscious projections of our fear, but in fact, this idea that we're all God and we're playing a game with ourselves to grow and mold ourselves. Are we testing ourselves with fear to transcend it by manifesting these experiences in an ever-present, ever-flowing dance of progression and conquering of fears and overcoming the adversaries and creating eustress for our own species so that we continue to evolve? You see how complicated this starts to get? And it's not as simple as just saying it's government technology or it's aliens. There are so many possibilities. And one of the issues with the fact that we don't talk about these possibilities is because we're ridiculed for imagining that the world is more than what the scientists tell us, as if they have everything figured out, or more than what the Catholic Church tells us, because they've got it covered. What did the Catholic Church do recently, like May 5th or something? I'm sorry. Yeah. It was May 5th or something around that. They're like, oh, we need to redefine what the spiritual experience is. If you see an apparition or whatever, we have to explain to you what's going on here. What are they getting ahead of? And who the hell are they to jump in the middle of our spiritual experiences and tell us what they are based on their very corrupted and consistently incorrect worldview. Who's giving them credibility? Themselves. It's to control a narrative, because after we get through maybe some of its aliens and spacecraft, after we get through maybe some of its government technology in the form of craft, after we get through maybe its government technology in the form of psychotronics, right? The Nazis were big into psychotronics, essentially like creating real technologies that can then send messages to your brain. You know, they talk about the was it voice to skull or whatever. They had an interesting name for it. This is rumors. This might not be entirely accurate, but there was a rumor that they could send messages into people's heads on the battlefield, like if they were in the Middle East and the soldiers were Muslim, they would send a voice that was like a, you know, like kind of like would sound like a god, and it's Allah telling them to drop their guns, and allegedly they did. I don't know how true that is, but it's not so far off to think that they could develop a technology that could at least change the way your brain was thinking, right? Brains operate in different waveforms, alpha, delta, beta, etc. And those can change your mood. And if you were hit with a psychotronic, some sort of frequency that could modulate, affect, and change your brain waves, maybe it could also change the way you were thinking. Maybe it could also cause you to see images, et cetera, et cetera. So once we get past the psychotronics, so, you know, what we have so far, we have the potential for some sort of natural phenomenon that has always been here, that's not necessarily intelligent. Now think about another thing. These things do seem kind of random. They're not organized. Just show up on somebody's farm out of nowhere. They don't seem to have order to them. And so maybe it's a natural phenomenon. Maybe trying to understand these things as aliens is the same thing as us looking at a hurricane and being like, what does the hurricane want? You know what I mean? It's like the hurricane doesn't want anything. The hurricane is just an expression of the earth discharging energy. So what if that's what the whole thing is? What if it's a natural phenomenon that just happens to have psychological effects on us because whatever frequencies are coming out of it evoke like the amygdala? Maybe this is like some kind of form of lightning, of some electrical static that gets condensed, and when it releases it, the particular frequency stimulates your amygdala, and then your amygdala, thinking it's in danger, projects an image because it doesn't see anything dangerous. Ooh, that would be mind-blowing, and that's a possibility. So then it stops being nefarious. Then it's just as neutral as a hurricane. And there's a high potentiality possibility that that's all this is a natural phenomenon we don't understand yet. But once we get all past all that, we get into these ideas that Carl Jung and Cynthia Nelson, and there's this other woman who talked about basically like the gray alien and the spaceship being unconscious projections. Now, when I say unconscious projections, right, what I'm saying is the collective unconscious might have some sort of generational trauma or anticipation for the future because we share cultural ideas, because millions of people watched a movie. And the more people that think that thought, it can actually affect the fabric of space-time and manifest some of these ideas into physical reality. I know this seems far out, but if you've ever heard of the real definition of the poltergeist, it's thought that the slamming of cupboards and doors and certain ghost activities and things being knocked off the counter is actually your psychic energy blowing outward and causing physical disturbances. This has always been the actual definition of a poltergeist. A poltergeist isn't intelligent or conscious. A poltergeist is like a little mini psychic hurricane that you create from your own emotions and thoughts. Mostly unconscious. If they were conscious, you'd realize you were doing it. It would be called telepathy. So it's kind of like unconscious telepathy. That's what a poltergeist is. And so what if we're dealing with super poltergeists, collective poltergeists? What if it's real? A lot of people will scoff and laugh, but they've got they've got nothing to prove that it can't be. And since science won't touch it because they pretend like they're better than it, we can't get to the bottom of it anyway. Because no one will take a truly skeptical approach on it. What does skepticism mean? It doesn't mean to try to prove something wrong, even though that's what you've always seen when someone says, I'm a skeptic. It's what they're saying is, I don't believe anything. That's not a skeptic. Where does skeptic come from? Skepticism, Greek philosophy. What does that mean? Socrates was a skeptic. What did it mean for Socrates to be a skeptic? He walked the middle line. He tried not to pick a side. He tried to ask lots of questions. And what happened to him? He got in a lot of trouble for it. What happens every time someone's a true skeptic? Well, everyone on the radical sides think they're the most radical and they get all the heat. But that's the most valuable person in our society, is someone who's willing to consider all options and doesn't ever like, boom, okay, we'll pick this one, until there's no doubt whatsoever that that's the truth. And so we don't have a skeptical approach in science anymore. Science has become a religion, right? And then religion has a stranglehold on the rest of it. You understand what I'm saying? The New Age movement will tell you for certain it's Pleiadians. And that same New Age movement 30 years ago will tell you for certain it was Martians. And the same type of people would have told you for certain they're fairy people who live on a castle in a mountain or a ship in the sky. Did you know they used to see literal wooden ships in the sky? Nothing I'm telling you, I'm not making any of this up. It's not, I heard this from a friend. This is well documented history. They would see literal like pirate ships in the sky that would drop anchor. The anchor would catch on the ground. It would cause a physical disturbance on the ground. And people on the boats would swim down and loosen the anchor. Presidents saw these things. Policemen, trusted townspeople, entire towns saw these things multiple times. Jacque Vallee is a perfect place to start. The book is Passport to Magonia. He is an excellent, credible, yes, wooden ships, an excellent and credible researcher and scientist who can back up everything he says. He's studied thousands of cases that have occurred over the course of 1,000 years of human history. There is no doubt that those people saw what they saw. The question is, what does it mean? What is the source of the emanation? What is the source of the creation or manifestation? And so religion has a hold on the rest of it, which wouldn't necessarily be bad if most if not all of our religions were corrupted. How many times has one of these sightings created a cult that ultimately ended in sometimes the loss of life? Many times. How many of these experiences were taken, basically the Vatican put their robe over all these sightings and said, yes, this is part of the spiritual experience. This is all signs and prophecy of things to come. Just listen to how we're explaining to you what actually happened, right? So you have science that won't touch it, who needs to touch it, with a truly scientific mind, not a scientism indoctrination of the scientist religion. And then we have the spiritual communities who grab the rest of it and tell you how to perceive it, right? We need a skeptical approach in understanding these phenomena. Okay, so let's jump on some more questions here. So do I think we can protect ourselves from these beings? Well, think about it this way. It seems to have something to do with the power of the mind, human mind. And so I would say if we needed to protect ourselves from these beings, if they were actually nefarious and dangerous, the thing we would need to do is be strong in our minds and our faith in a greater power that is represented by the greatest good. George Harrison said something beautiful, and I'm going to screw up the quote, but I saw it last night. And he said, when you align yourself with what is good, with doing the right thing, you are unstoppable because you've aligned yourself with a greater power. You could talk about the idea of a God and give the God characteristics. You talk about a Yahweh or Jehovah or Krishna or Buddha, not Buddha, but you get the idea. Well, yeah, some people I might regard Buddha as God or Jesus Christ and give them facial features and a skin color and a way of dress and all this stuff that doesn't matter. But if you walk around and you ask everyone to start explaining what God is, if you take two people from the same church and you sit them both down and have them write an essay about God or start talking, a lot of what they say is going to sound the same at first, but eventually you're going to see deviations. And at a certain point, they're going to get in a fight with each other. Most likely, they're going to get into an argument. Why? Because what's happened is people have created a subjective God, which isn't what God is. God is very much an objective force, but what God is a representation of good. And so if you want to protect yourself from whatever these things are, now this is no guarantee, but the best thing you could possibly do against the forces of evil is to align yourself with the greatest forces of good. Truth, courage, mercy, compassion, love, strength, wisdom, humility, belief and faith in oneself and the greater power that wants for the world to be good. The human world, the earthly world, the animal world, and every other world you could think of, to manifest harmony and progression in the world and to expand upon consciousness so that the universe can better understand itself. That's what you align yourself with. If you're going to try to protect yourself from the forces of evil, then align yourself with the greatest forces of good. That's the answer. Okay, that's the answer I would say. So let's see. Do you think the veil of what we can see is thinning and that it is why we will see more of these entities? Daniel, I think so. And it's not as easy as like saying like so the question is, do you think the veil of what we can see is thinning and that is why we will see more of these entities? I say quick answer, yes. But I'm not saying it like it's prophesized, it will happen in this year and da 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 da. I think back then the veil wasn't a veil, it just didn't exist. The veil is an artificial construction created by churches and governments for you to not be able to perceive the truth of reality. I think back in the day we all saw these things normally and naturally. It was just talk to your grandmother and ask her about the folklore tales. Ask her about the stories of the experiences people had. Most people had them. It was common knowledge and it wasn't super scary. It was just normal. Like, oh, yeah. There was a spirit in the house and it would open doors and da 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 da. Like everyone's grandma and grandpa probably has that story, has 10 of those stories. The veil was placed over us and it was done probably in recent history. We're talking about two different veils, Naya. I'm talking about the veil that disallows us to experience the spiritual world that is available to us. I'm not talking about the tetragrammaton. I'm not talking about the hyperdimensional geometric lattice of creation in between, or the thing that separates the hyperdimensional geometric lattice of creation, which manifests reality, and our reality, the Maya, the illusion, or samsara. I'm just discussing the fact that we used to see these things and experience these things all the time. There was a whole culture and system of approach, and now we don't have that. If you go over to Oman, if you go over to Saudi Arabia, the spiritual world is very prevalent in every day. They see these things all the time. There are rules about how to approach the desert, how to go into the desert. Watch out for the pillars of fire and smoke, which are the jinn and will pull you in. You in Saudi Arabia, I have friends that has personally happened to. They saw a fire in the desert And they went to go because they thought maybe someone crashed their car or something. They kept on following this fire in the desert, and they could never not get any closer. Hours and hours passed by. They finally returned. They're like, we can't get to this fire. They come back, and the dad's terrified, and the dad kind of freaks out on him a little bit, obviously, but he's like, don't. And then they said, well, we saw a fire. We thought maybe there was someone in trouble. He's like, never follow the fire into the desert. That is the Djinn trying to pull you in so that you'll starve to death or bake in the sun. That's common knowledge over there. So think about it that way. The veil isn't placed over many of the eyes over there, right? The veil isn't over the whole earth. Go camping for 3 days with the intention of connecting with the spiritual world. You'll see that there is no veil outside of the veil that's placed over our eyes by social media and bad science and bad religion. You want to have an experience? Are you brave enough to have an experience? Go take a 3-day camping trip by yourself with the intention of connecting with spirit. It's a guarantee, like with intention, it's a guarantee you will have an experience by yourself. Make sure you go to a safe place where there's not like bears and wolves. I don't want to give you bad advice. You want to have a spiritual experience, you will have one. And fast, take enough food so that, you don't get low blood sugar or whatever, make sure you're doing all the healthy things you're supposed to do to keep yourself safe. Bring a phone, maybe even bring a radio. Don't be too far away that it'd be hard. Don't get lost, right? Go on trails, make sure there's good paths, et cetera, et cetera. Let people know exactly where you're going to be. Do all the safety protocol stuff. You want to have a spiritual experience. You want to see the veil down, my friend. Yeah, man. Do a 3-day fast and camp alone in some secluded woods for 3 days. I guarantee you the veil will fall. So the reason the veil is falling across the entire world is really the sharing of information at light speed, because they can no longer compartmentalize experiences of people. So everyone's getting to share everything with each other. You understand what I'm saying? You can't tell people that Christianity has conquered the world when, you can watch a YouTube video right now about all the religions and how much they're flourishing right now. You can't tell people that spiritual experiences don't happen when you can, make 10 friends from Saudi Arabia when you're in college, and they can tell you these incredible stories, and every single one of them are consistent with the next one. There's so much sharing happening that it's impossible for them to control the narrative completely. And so the veil falls more because of a psychological thing. Now, what are they doing? I won't use the specific words. I'll try to hint. There's a way for them to throw enough static into the atmosphere, which slows down the ability to perceive it. The psychological tricks, because you have to understand something. Think about body dysmorphism. Yeah, exactly. That instrument that they play like this, and you just add an extra A in it. Well, that's definitely one of the notes, one of the major notes, and then the one over in Switzerland's another major node, and then we have the major nodes in every other electrical bar. And so that's how they're changing it, because the psychological devices aren't working anymore. Because of the sharing of information technology, we break all these old cultural systems because there's enough people that can call bullshit on each other because they believe in a different thing. It's like, yeah, that's kind of ridiculous. Or we can just go on Google right now and we can pull up all of human history and we can show you how that's not true. And so the psychological devices aren't going to work as well for a narrative. Their marketing and media is becoming ineffective because of the advent of the internet. So the internet has some good qualities, obviously. Of course, they're hijacking that and censorship. So what they're building now is more psychotronics, more ways to control your mind remotely with technology, which is much more difficult because you can't, if someone's having an experience right in front of their eyes, how are you going to talk them out of that? You can talk them out of believing in a book that they read. That's a lot easier than talking them out of having experience they thought they had. Look, I've been trying to talk people out of thinking that they've talked to Pleiadians for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Can't do it. They have that dream, they have that vision. Doesn't matter how many Jacque Vallee books I recommend to them. I can't talk them out of it. So that's how they're evolving, the trying to keep the veil. So yes, the veil's coming down, but we have to help it come down more. And like I said, the veil is only placed in certain areas. Yeah, so that's what I would say to that. And that is why we all see more of these entities. Yeah, so like I said, you'll see that the veil can come down if you just get yourself away from the culture, get yourself away from the frequencies, the artificial frequencies, etc. Let's see if there's any more good questions here we can touch on. I mean, all the questions are good, but some I might like better. What was the book called again? The Magonia one. Okay, so it's Passport to Magonia. The book is life-changing for me. I want to show you the cover of it because it's actually really cool. And it's such a great overall, like, it's a symbolic representation of what the whole book is about. So give me 10 seconds. Beautiful cover. I show it to both people here, both audiences. You got a sort of ambiguous type of being, kind of like a gray alien, but he's green. And he's got 3 masks. One's a devil, one's a Martian, and one's just a beautiful blonde woman. Do you know that's interesting too, is that with the gray alien experiences, many people also see right before the gray alien reveals itself a beautiful blonde woman. Well, what does that sound like? Right? The tall whites, the Nords. I forget where they come from. Maybe they're the Pleiadians, but maybe the Pleiadians are blue. It's hard to keep track, right? But the tall, beautiful blonde. And then that tall, beautiful blonde changes into the gray alien. So I think that he also picked that. He also requested that image purposely. So yeah, it's Passport to Magonia, and it's Jacque Vallee, Jacque, Jacque Vallee, Vallee. Yes, I'm sure sirens are definitely connected to it. Yeah. Right. So now we're seeing there's an ecosystem here. One of the things I really hope that you guys get from this is that we should be relating all these things together, at least loosely, for the investigation to understand what it is. Not to say that Bigfoot and gray aliens are directly connected or the exact same thing, or the Bigfoot was made by gray aliens. What I want you to do is think about the fact that many times when people were experiencing UFO sightings and gray aliens, they also were experiencing Bigfoot sightings. It happens a lot. Why? They seem like 2 entirely separate things. But then many people will say that the Bigfoot is essentially like a spiritual shaman who can freeze you with their eyes. Those are repeated stories out of Bigfoot encounters, that they had these kind of glowing eyes that when they looked at you, you couldn't move. You know, the gray aliens do that too. Many of the experienced gray aliens, they look at you and you're frozen. You can't move. Why do these 2 things have so many similarities? It's strange. So the thing I want to get across is that we should start trying to consider this, like I said, as an ecosystem. And as an ecosystem that could be many different things. It could be aliens trying to manipulate the human race. It could be a natural phenomenon, not unlike a hurricane or a tornado, where the earth is discharging massive amounts of electricity, and the massive amounts of electricity have some sort of psychological effect. We know if you stand next, here's something. We know if you stand next to a power transformer or one of those really big electrical poles that you'll find out in the country because they're trying to carry from the power plant to the city. If you stand right next to those, you'll start hallucinating. You'll start seeing ghosts or whatever. If you sit right up next to those big electrical systems, you will start to see things that aren't there. So we know that massive amounts of electricity and electromagnetic radiation can actually cause us to see things that weren't there otherwise. So what if this is a natural electrical discharge that causes us to hallucinate? And our brain just does the extra work. We're under some sort of physiological stress, and the brain is trying to translate it. And so it projects it. It projects an image. If you've ever done the mirror thing, the memento mori mirror practice, where some people say this, it is not scrying. Scrying is when you use a reflective service to intentionally communicate with spirits. That is not the same as sitting in front of a mirror with a candle, contemplating your existence and your subconscious projecting symbolic imagery in place of where your reflection was to show you something about reality. These are two absolutely different things, and what I'm explaining is not scrying. The only reason I'm so adamant about this is because so many people get on they literally will just put the word scrying. So I know at this point they're trying to mess with me because I've corrected them so many times. It is not scrying. But if you were to sit in front of a mirror with a dim light and relax, take a nice deep breath, and just keep an open mind, your face will literally change to a tiger, sometimes a caveman, an alien, right before your eyes. Sometimes your reflection will do things you're not doing, smile and wink. That's what happened with me. My reflection literally smiled and winked. I'm sober and I'm awake and I'm looking at this mirror and this is happening. And no, it's not me and I'm not schizophrenic because this happens to everyone when they do it. If they do it for long enough, you have to relax, because if you're too tense, nothing will happen. But you'll start to feel this little weird feeling on the back of your neck. And within a couple minutes, you see things you never thought possible. So scientists say, and I tend to agree partially with them, is that it's because your brain is wondering why you keep staring at the same thing so long. So it actually reforms the image because it thinks that it's computing incorrectly, and that's why you're looking at it so long. And so it reforms the image and gives you something different. One, what does that tell you about reality actually is? Right? Because we're in a bath of subatomic particles, and we're stabilizing and collapsing all of that energy into a perceivable reality. But the perceivable reality isn't as real as we think it is, i.e., the mirror experiment. So if we can do that standing in front of a mirror, and power lines can do what they do if we sit too close to them. The Earth's a much bigger generator of energy than any power plant. And so what if it gives off energy a certain way sometimes, rogue energy, and it causes hallucinations? It's something to think about. Yeah. Yeah, so actual scrying, not to say there's anything wrong with actual scrying. I don't like the idea of intentionally trying to seek out an intelligent consciousness outside of ourselves as like a spirit or a god, because I think it can be obviously misleading. If there is entities on the other side, we don't know anything about them or what their intentions are. So I just always stay away from that stuff because you can't trust it. And until we understand it more, I think it's important for us to be careful and have a scientific approach if we're going to do communications, right? Because obviously whatever this thing is, it has a deceptive quality, whether that's intentional or not. It keeps on reforming itself, whether it's our own self-deception and subconscious projections, or it's an intelligent entity outside of us that is being deceptive to hide its true nature. Either way, we should reject deception, and we should try to clarify. We should try to eradicate deception by finding the truth of what's actually happening. All right. Dane Wolf. So I have had experiences with gray aliens as well. But I think we should be careful about saying that we were definitely abducted. Because you have to think about the context of all these things. What does it mean that you definitely get brought into a spaceship? Have you ever had a dream that felt so real you swore it was real? Even when you woke up, you thought that was realer than this world. Because I have. I've had dreams where I was like, that was realer than here. This feels fake. This feels like a dream after what just happened to me. right? So we have to be careful as to not say this is definitely what's happening. It's just our own personal experience. We need to look over all the data. We need to look over all the experiences and correlate and collate and process the data and ask ourselves, what's the bigger thing happening here? What is the consistent narrative? What's the consistent qualities of the experience? Is there physical evidence? Now, there has been people who have said they were abducted and there was physical evidence inside of their body. But what does that mean even? Because honestly, with things like scopolamine and LSD and all these other things, and we know what happened with MK Ultra, I'm certain that government officials could come into your house, do enough stuff to you. Oh, here we go. Oh, okay, it's just one of those things. Are you a robot, even though you're a normal human being who's been talking this whole time? Unable to verify. I put the dang puzzle in. All right, completed the puzzle, TikTok. Put me back on. Okay. So I don't know why they do that. There's clearly bots on here, people that are just doing a live of a hamster running on a hamster wheel, and it's like they can go on for hours. Maybe they have a timer on, so they know when to do that. I'm not a bot. Anyway, um, they could artificially conceive a false memory that you were certain was real, right? Think about it. Oh, to verify you're not pre-recorded. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. So they could absolutely create a false memory. When you start to see all the pieces of the puzzle, right? When you take all the things that ever happened, that's interesting, Dane. That's very interesting. You know, this happens to a lot of people who are associated or connected to the government and the federal and in aerospace. It happens a lot to them. When we think about Jack Parsons, right? Jack Parsons was allegedly communicating with all sorts of spirits, and he was head of JPL. Or is it, yeah, JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratories. Interesting that his name was Jack Parsons, which is the same initials. See how spooky reality is? Yeah, so this tends to happen a lot. Yeah, Terrence Howard's story is interesting because, so here's something interesting. A lot of these experiences, what the people end up perceiving is usually dependent on their current belief system. I'll give you an interesting story of my own, an anecdote from my own story. Take it or leave it, believe me if you want. I have lots of stories and experiences about this. Last night we saw a UFO. I got it on video, and I would play it right now, but it's on my phone. But I'm thinking of maybe if you guys want to jump to TikTok or YouTube toward the end, I'll play it on my phone and I'll show you guys. Wild. It was actually like, it was a legitimate UFO. I could not explain it. Now we've been out here for a while, and was couldn't figure it out. Anyway, so I was going to be working on a book, a book about spirituality. That was going to kind of give you guys the ins and outs of what this reality actually is. It was going to be an awesome book. Many years ago, many years ago, and I was going to write it with my godfather, who's also very like deep into esotericism. I learned half of everything I know from my godfather, and God bless him. I love him. His name's Chris. Amazing guy. He's Polish, and so he had like a lot of the wisdom on like the Eastern European esotericism and like, but like, you know, the community's wisdom, right? Like there's such an esoteric wisdom in these rural areas, especially in Europe and the Middle East. And so he had all that information, plus he studied a lot. Anyway, so we were going to write this book together, just connect everything he knew. He was a bit older than me, and he was connected to all these generations. And he worked with people who were directly working at it with remote viewing with the government. And so anyways, we're going to write this book and just talk about all these different things. Yes, Daniel, and I do want to discuss that a little bit. And we'll touch on that. And then we'll jump to that question at the top. Yeah, we'll talk about Terrence Howard a little bit too. So I was gonna write this book. We're all excited about it. We kind of made a decision on this one day. I go home, go to sleep. He's obviously in his house. He goes to sleep. And we both have very strange experiences that night. I am given an experience where I am essentially threatened that I will be killed. My soul will be annihilated, and my genetic or quantum signature will be recorded, and then it will be that will be banned from this reality, so no one like me can ever exist again. That is what I'm given. It says, if you write this book, that's what we're going to do to you. Those three things. I never imagined the possibility of the third thing, that we would unmake your existence and make it so no one like you could exist again. It was a very, very specific threat. So I go over his house the next day, and I'm genuinely terrified because not only was that happening, when I woke up, I heard a humming, rumbling over the house, like a ship was above it. Terrified, terrified. It changed me. I was pseudo catatonic for months after that happened because it was very real. There was all these other crazy things, like it was a deep dream that was very like wheels within wheel. It was really mind blowing. Anyways, so I go over the house the next day to talk to my godfather. This is going somewhere really important. And he seems a little off too. And I'm like, he seems bummed out a little bit, actually. I'm like, and I'm trying to work up the courage to tell him that I can't write the book. I'm terrified. I'm taking the threat seriously from whatever this is. And before I can speak, he says, Mark, I don't think we should write the book. And I was like, I don't think so either. And I'm totally relieved. And then he says, last night I fell asleep on the couch or on the chair, on the recliner that he has. And an angel visited me and said, Chris, you've done a wonderful job. You figured everything out, but understand that the path to spiritual knowledge is everyone's individually. So you have to let people figure it out for themselves. It's wonderful that you did what you did, but you got to keep it to yourself. So why was my godfather visited by a Catholic style angel? Christian, Catholic, so he did go to Catholic church. And why was I visited by something that didn't present itself in any image and just threatened me straight up? Because he was a Catholic Christian that would believe an angel, and I wasn't. In fact, I wouldn't believe anything. I wouldn't believe any type of religious imagery or anything. I would call bullshit on it. So they got right to the point with me. But we both had an experience that had the same outcome. Don't write the book. Yeah, we're going to show the UAP footage at the end, but we're not going to do it on TikTok. We're going to do it over on the YouTube. And so right before we close out, which probably about 25 more minutes, you guys can jump to the YouTube and I'll play the video at the end. I'm hoping it'll pick it up well, right? And what I'm going to end up doing is I'll actually just share it as a video on TikTok so you'll be able to see it. So it's not going to look great on YouTube, but I'll share it to YouTube and I'll share it to TikTok sometime this week. So again, we're seeing different skins, different methods, but overall the goals are the same. Managing reality, managing psychology, right? So for anything you missed, because I see a couple people said they came a little bit late, for anything you missed, this is going to be a pre-record on YouTube as well. So as soon as the live's over, this is going to upload to the YouTube. Find the YouTube by looking at the link in my bio. Thank you very much, friend. Okay, so let's see if there's, oh yeah, have you heard of JK Ultra? She is a content creator who says a lot about aliens and esoteric info. She thinks Terrence Howard has controlled that position. Do you think there's a chance that's true? So we'll be able to answer both questions in one. All right. With a name like JK Ultra, I'm not making any judgment here, but with a name like JK Ultra, I have to immediately be concerned. Why? Because that's exactly what MK Ultra would do. They would make a sarcastic quip and turn it into a personality. I'm not saying that's what she is. I'm saying it's potentiality. Everything that has ever come out of theories on galactic federation has always produced zero results and always over time proven itself wrong. It has always been wrong. Every time they say they're from one planet, we end up being able to see close enough to that planet, and there's nothing there that they said was there. The Galactic Federation theory is a wash. It's broken. And I am shocked anyone still believes it. Because but you have to study the whole Galactic Federation evolution from scratch, from the very beginning, from the first person who said that. And you have to see that they have been caught, that whatever these beings are have been caught in so many lies. And so for JK Ultra to accuse Terrence Howard of being controlled opposition without having any evidence whatsoever, while also supporting a theory that is clearly a controlled opposition to truth, is a little concerning and honestly hypocritical. And I don't want to, like, I'm not trying to be mean to her. Like, I think there's videos she's made that I actually liked a lot. But the Galactic Federation's a joke. And I think we all know that, whether we know it right on the top of our heads or deep down inside. It's a joke. Whatever these beings are, they've been caught in so many lies because they used to be Martians, then they were Venetians, then they were Pleiadians, then they were blah, 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 blah. So that's not true. Terrence Howard being controlled opposition. When you are studying anybody, like a Terrence Howard or whoever, because I understand how everyone feels. I understand when people think Joe Rogan's controlled opposition, and he might be. And the only reason we think that is because we know how vicious and powerful the opposition is. Therefore, if anyone is able to actually get a podium, we are suspicious of. I can completely understand why people wouldn't trust Alex Jones or Russell Brand or Joe Rogan or all these people who are the face of the alternative media. And I'm not saying that they're not controlled opposition. And sometimes I get the suspicion, like, I'm not sure if they're trying to, feels maybe like a narrative that's pushing us in the wrong. But we have to, in order to study any sort of subvertive, deceptive messaging, we have to study between the lines and see what would be getting achieved. What is getting achieved by Terrence Howard becoming viral? I watched the Joe Rogan. I know what Terrence is saying. The fundamental, most important thing you could be getting from what Terrence Howard is saying is that the universe operates primarily off of frequency, which manifests and organizes reality. It is not primarily physical objects. That's extremely important for everyone on the planet to appreciate. And that's why I said that Terrence Howard was single-handedly saving the world, because he was. And that was his day. I'm not saying like he's the savior forever. I'm saying give that man his day, because what he was saying was absolutely important. So important for us right now to understand that we can manifest reality by a means of technology that would cause the entire world to change overnight and liberate every human being on the planet and stop us from destroying the earth. If we understood that we can manifest forces and matter from music. So that's one thing that can be achieved by letting Terrence Howard go viral. What other messaging was in there? Study the messaging. Study the effect. Jacque Vallee talks about this all the time. In order for us, if this is an intelligent phenomenon like UFO, right, or Terrence Howard is a construct, in order to decipher that and what their stratagem is, we have to see the results. And since this is language and ideas, we have to study the psychological effects first And then, of course, the secondary physical effects that occur, like when ideas move people to action. So let's study the psychological effect of what Terrence Howard has done. What negative effects have happened? Some people say, well, people think 1 times 1 is 2 now. Well, that's not even what he said exactly, right? That's a complete misinterpretation of what he's saying. What Terrence Howard was saying is when you multiply anything, no matter how many times you multiply it, you're multiplying it. He's talking about the broken concepts at the core of mathematics. Then he actually breaks down how they actually have a literal exclusion principle just for 1 times 1, because it literally doesn't fit algorithmically and graphically into the rest of the multiplication table. So it's more than just, well, it wasn't just some childish thing like, oh, if you multiply 1 and 1 and 1 plus 1 is 2, but you're multiplying is a bigger function. It's not like that. No, he breaks it down. There's way more to it. But the thing he was trying to communicate there, the larger thing was, I think we need to look at the fundamentals of the way we run math and science, because I think some of it's broken. And that's true. Even the good scientists and mathematicians in their fields will tell you that science and math is broken. Perfect example, Eric Weinstein. He will tell you that quantum physics is absolutely broken right now and on pause because there's something wrong and there's a lot of bad theories and ideas. You want someone credible? How about one of the smartest men on the planet? Eric Weinstein is one of the most brilliant human beings maybe to ever exist. And he's telling you that quantum physics is broken, that mathematics is stalled. Terrence Howard didn't really say anything differently. He just proposed some theories. Are all of his theories going to be right? Probably not. No one in all their theories are going to be absolutely right. So, like when you're trying to, if someone just says Terrence Howard's controlled opposition, I'm thinking they're controlled opposition. Unless they come up with something really reasonable. So, well, Terrence Howard was a Mason. I was a Mason. When I was younger, I joined the Masonic Lodge. I became a 3rd-degree Mason, and I found out it was not for me. And I did get a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth because I did have a bad experience, and I left. There are some people that still put me in a box of dangerous guy, don't trust him because he was a Mason. And technically I still am, because you don't become disavowed from Masonry. And there's people that will never believe anything I say and think that I'm a bad guy. And I have a long con that I've been doing for years now without any evidence of anything I'm getting out of that long con. And so you have to come with more like, then he's a Mason, or he was on Joe Rogan and Joe Rogan's controlled opposition too. It's like, this is far more just use the word complex. There's a better word. This is a far more complex situation than just, well, because if he's in that group, then he definitely is. You can't make it that simple. You have to be studying this at a subtle level. Do you realize that clandestine organizations took over news media in the 1950s and 60s with Operation Mockingbird? You have not been watching news for 60 years if you have gotten it from any of the national broadcast channels, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. They're entirely propaganda. They have been for decades. There is nothing that comes out of those speakers besides the rare accidents where you catch one of the news anchors talking about what's really happening, and then they get fired the next day. You have not heard anything for 5 decades or so, because I would say it took about 10 to 20 years for them to really dial it in. You have not heard anything in 5 decades or more that was ever actual news, that was not approved by clandestine organizations. And even more recently, we know that the news is completely controlled. Do you want to know why? Because when we were in the Middle East, early 2000s, when anybody reported anything critical of what the Bush administration was doing, their White House press conference access was revoked. They did that a couple times, and every news station stopped reporting critically against the US's policies or actions in the Middle East. That's how easy it was. So, but I'm sure there's a lot of people that think they're actually watching the news because it seems like the news. If you're not really sharp about this stuff and know all these things have happened, you would be fooled by it. So the reason I'm saying all this is going back to Terrence Howard and Joe Rogan or whatever. If they're controlled opposition, damn, it's good. And it requires deep study before we jump to any conclusions. And we need to take the effect of what's happening from the words and see what's happening to the world. Because what I see is a lot of people who are actually expanding on what Terrence Howard is saying, and what they're saying also makes sense. And it's actually opening people's minds to the possibility of the 369, everything is frequency, vibration, harmonics, which is true. That is all good. I haven't seen any actual negative outcomes come out of Terrence Howard getting to talk. And he knows what he's talking about. Maybe not everything. I don't agree with everything that he's saying because, he talks about the harmonics and the stuff. And then he starts talking about physical applications of technology that I feel are a wrong turn on the right road. It's what Terrence Howard is talking about is a liberation from material technology. But he talks about the not needing to farm so many resources because we'll be able to produce these things with harmonics. That's a good thing. Yeah, so judge a tree by the fruit it bears. Like I said, I'm not trying to cause a controversy with JK Ultra, especially if she is a Fed. I ain't trying to mess with them right now. But I will say that the Galactic Federation is a wash, and that's obvious. And I don't know why she's disseminating that information. It's bad information. It's lies. So I think that she should spend more time looking at herself before she throws dirt on somebody with, look, you can't compile a credible critique a few days after this guy's gotten 3 hours of airtime. You cannot say something. He's controlled opposition. Yeah, you need a little more time with the information, and you need a little more time with him talking before you can make an assessment like that. 3 hours? Everyone was calling me a fanboy for Terrence Howard. No, I understand something beyond Terrence Howard. The words that he says and the ideas that he just made mainstream. That we need to ride like a freaking 50-foot wave with our surfboards of thinking. And so anybody who's preemptively throwing dirt on his name, I'm suspicious of. Absolutely. Because I watched the podcast. He wasn't ever incoherent or belligerent. He might have expanded on ideas and talked about things that he didn't give definitions for, like the wave conjugation stuff. He kept saying that, but he didn't really explain it really well. And it might just be because he's so severely comfortable with the concepts, and he's not he hasn't done this a lot yet where he's presented his stuff, that he didn't simplify it down to layman's terms for everybody the way he should have. But that didn't mean he was being unreasonable or delusional. That man was far from delusional. At any point in the 3 hours, there was no delusion there. So yeah, I would say, like I said, judge a tree by the fruit that it bears. What is the psychological effect of what happened? Are we seeing physical manifestations and effects? I'm seeing good conversation arise from it. That seems to be overall generally productive and opening people's minds. I see that, there was this one guy. There's another guy on TikTok that I've had these encounters with these, no offense to him, but wannabe scientists, intellectual guys that go around picking on people for thinking differently, and And Terrence McKenna talked about, this is a perfect example, and then we'll try to get back on UFOs. Terrence Howard talks about how gravity is such a strange force, because you can take a little magnet and pick up a piece of metal and lift it off the earth. And so there's this guy on TikTok that's like, Terrence doesn't know what he's talking about. It's just static. It goes on and on. What this person fails to understand is that Terrence Howard was using the metaphor that scientists use, credible scientists at the cutting edge of the field of the study of gravity and other forces, to explain what's wrong with gravity. Like, that's what the scientists use to explain it, because it is a conundrum that I could pick this, it may not this one, because I think this is titanium, but I could pick up a small piece of metal with a small magnet, and the earth, as big as it is, cannot resist that with its force of gravity. The issue with that is that the gravitational force should balance out with electromagnetism, or the universe should rip apart. And that's the struggle they're having, is because the dance between the strong and weak nuclear forces allow for atoms to stay together. And we have to do really crazy things to break that, and that's called an atomic explosion. And so the fact that we have an elegant, balanced dance between strong and weak nuclear force, we're allowed to have atoms. Scientists cannot find that dance between electromagnetism and gravity. It's obviously happening because the universe exists, but they don't know why or how. To the point that they have said that gravity is a force leaking from another dimension, and it's actually a lot stronger on the other side of the dimension, and it has invisible effects on the reality that balance out the equational dance between electromagnetism and gravity. So, just want to give the answer to the question, or the answer to what I think is the problem. When they use that example, the scientists with the magnet and the earth, they're not taking into account that the force of gravity, one, is a tension force produced by the warping of space-time by the body. They think density is the fundamental coefficient of gravity. How dense an object has a coefficient effect to the force of gravity. It's not. It's volume. Because we are stretching space-time like a trampoline from all sides, kind of like what Einstein said about the one trampoline, except the trampolines are everywhere, going in every direction. And when something expands in that, let's say, block of elastic, the block of elastic goes from at ease or resting position to being stretched out. What's happening? The elastic is pushing back. The force of gravity is divided by the entire area of the object. And therefore, when you're picking up a metal object with a magnet in a particular area on the earth, you're only fighting from the force of a small area of the full gravity of the earth. So let's see if we can jump on some questions. That's just my theory onto what gravity, but that's what Terrence Howard's trying to suggest. And if you really listen and pay attention to what he's saying, and you disconnect yourself a little bit from the propaganda you've been given by science, then he starts to make a lot more sense. That's the biggest question. Like we said earlier, the reason we're so suspicious of all these people is they're still alive. Look what happened to JFK in the 60s, I think it was the 60s, broke all of our hearts and helped us to understand that the world was more like Game of Thrones than it was Cinderella. And we've slowly begun to realize that it was always like that. That it didn't just happen when America didn't just lose their innocence on that fateful day in Texas. We just came to the realization that there was never any innocence, and that if someone wanted someone to get got, they would do it. Here's a couple theories. They don't take anyone seriously until they actually accrue explicit power. 1. 2, America is right now trying to mitigate a global war that could potentially destroy everything. They are trying to mitigate the Bolshevik subversion, or they're the ones doing the Bolshevik subversion that is destroying the fabric of American society and individual citizens. They're trying to manage all the other people that are spreading real information about the truth of reality. They've got a lot going on right now. What's happening and what's in our favor with the revolution is that the situation is becoming so complex that no power, at least on Earth, is going to be able to keep this under control. The complexity of technology, the complexity of the merging of cultures and consciousness and ideas and intelligence is going to manifest the transcendental object at the end of time, the philosopher's stone, or a form of like a collective philosopher's stone. And the truth wills out no matter how long it takes. I think they're actually getting to a point of being overwhelmed because there's too much complexity. What we thought they were going to be able to do with control and censorship has not panned out. The alien invasion that they were going to plan is not going to happen. The prophetic blood sacrifice with all those heifers over in the Middle East didn't do anything. They've lost the plot. That's what I think happened. I think they lost the plot. I think that they don't know what to do. I think they didn't even understand the complexity. I think Project Looking Glass, there's probably some truth to it. And that light they saw at the end where they couldn't see past it, I think we're getting really close to it. So I think Terrence Howard is the least of their problems. And they have to they calculate these things. Like, do we keep offing these people? Because eventually people will catch on and maybe there will be riots. Do we just off everybody? They don't. I think they're running out of resources to try to control everything because, like I said, it's becoming too hyper complex for them. The governments are going to be, if this keeps going in this direction and people stand their ground, the governments will be dissolved, the Federal Reserve will be dissolved, the economy will be resolved, religions will be resolved, philosophies will be resolved. Everything is going to be dissolved and resolved. And the true human religion, the true human science, the true human politic is what's going to evolve out of that, because we're all going to finally say, oh, we all need the same stuff. Oh, there's some things that work and some things that don't. Oh, we can test the things to see if they work in reality. And then we can test them with A/B sampling and AI generation and all this to find out what the best version is. We should just do that one. There seems to be an imminence to awaken it. That makes me very hopeful, which is why I've retired from fighting the culture war and like to talk about these cool ideas instead, because I think the work is actually done. I think all the seeds have been planted. I think the ground has been fertilized. The sun is shining and we've watered everything. I think we're just waiting for the bloom. I think people like Terrence Howard, people like me, and thousands of other people on TikTok and YouTube show that we have finally exhausted them, that they did have a limit. There's not enough resources. All the students didn't pay their student loans. What did they do? Did they arrest all of them? Did they garnish their checks? Absolutely not. They gave them another year. And next year, they'll give them another year because they can't put them all in jail. They can't garnish their wages. They don't have as much power as we all thought they did. So I think that's happening in every place now. I think everyone's sick and tired. All the corporate entities that are overpricing us, we're just not paying. We're not buying from them anymore. They're all going broke. we're not putting up with it because we literally can't. And this was always doomed to fail because it was inefficient and ineffective. And it did not honor the human being. And there's too many of us to not honor to get away with it for that long. So yeah, you know, I'm pretty optimistic at this point, because it seems like the entire structure and architecture of their control system is not doing much work these days. So yeah, that's my take on that. I think this was a great conversation, guys. I do want to answer that question I promised I would answer in the beginning that they dropped. Can you give ideas on how to use magic without exalting yourself above others? It's real simple. Higher power. Have a God. Have a real God. What is your God? An intelligent, or what's the word they use? Hyper intelligent. There's another great word. I'll figure it out. Prolific. A prolific intelligence, like, you know, something that's not a human intelligence. It's like high, that's so high and unperceivable, but it exudes the perfected art of compassion, humility, courage, strength, the things I always talk about: love, passion, creation, hard work. Connect with that principle, with the faith that it's possible that it exists as an existential, enigmatic force of reality, and realize you will never be that great, but you can sure as hell try to be, for the right reasons. This is the foundational tenet of the right-hand path of magic. The great other, the big brother, the Holy Father. The idea of, like, and the Holy Mother too. I'm speaking because I'm a guy, but it works the same way for women. It is the epitomal ideal of what we could possibly be in our greatest form. We love the hero story because we actually love the hero. We love someone who we can trust with our lives, with our hearts, with our minds, with our insecurities and vulnerabilities. We love the leader who makes us feel protected and secure, that we can sleep easy at night knowing that they've got our back. We love the person that we can trust, that they're not going to lie to us or scam us or con us. That is your God. That was Jesus Christ's God. I know my Father is the Father in heaven because I speak truth. He's saying the act of speaking truth is connecting to the great Almighty. The very act of doing good is worshiping God. And when you align yourself with that, that is how you become someone who can be a master magician that does not exalt themselves above others, this does not end up falling into the dark arts, as Theo Von would say, that stays a magician of light who can have immense power, but moves towards benevolence with that power, right? So that's how you do that. You have to humble yourself amidst the great power of the great spirit. You have to humble yourself against the enigmatic conceptual manifestation of the highest version a human being could possibly attain. And realize that you're probably not going to get to the perfected form, but you can edge close to that and be an awesome person. And the gifts will be bestowed. So, and do no harm. Neutral or positive effect on everyone around you. At least neutral, but go for positive. Folks, this has been great. I haven't done this in a while. I think these are, I like doing this stuff way more than I like making the videos, because, like, you know, when you're scrolling and stuff, no one barely has any time to admit to sit for more than a minute on a video. So I think these things are much better, and people tend to want to sit down and chat, and I get to actually have direct conversations instead of a comment here and a comment there. So I really appreciate everyone that comes out to these and becomes a part of the discussion. I apologize to any questions that I missed. And all the gifts that were given and all the hearts and likes, I appreciate it immensely. Thank you very much. And yeah, we'll do this again soon, because I really do appreciate the connection I get to make here with all of you. And I hope that you guys get something out of this. God bless, peace, love, and respect. Have a wonderful rest of your Saturday, and we'll do this again soon. All right, guys. Peace. I will write a book one day. That is true.